Look at them making their honey. It's a beautiful view through the cross section, the end frame view. Gives you this cross section of the honeycomb, the bees down the cells, using their tongues, depositing their nectar, doing amazing work of making honey. And here we've got something interesting today. We've even got some pollen in a cell. You can see here, well, actually bee bread, and you can see by the way it's layers of pollen mixed with a little bit of honey. Usually that happens in the brood box, in the box below, where they're using it to feed to their babies. But right now we've got a little bit of pollen there, very unusual. We might even harvest a little bit of honey while we answer questions. This week's live stream is dedicated to asking those silly questions. Sometimes people feel a bit shy. There's a big world out there of beekeepers who often are very opinionated. Here, ask away. I'll be happy to answer any question, no matter how silly it is. The idea is we all started off as new beekeepers once, and it takes a journey of learning to get there and to understand the basics to get started. So the idea is to ask those questions, put them in the comments below. Also, let us know whether you're a beekeeper or not yet. Really interested to know that, so put that in the comments too. So while you're busy thinking of your questions and putting them in the comments, I'm going to harvest a little honey. So to do that, I've got the door that came right off here, and I'm putting it on the shelf brackets. Forms a nice little shelf here. Then I can get a jar and put it there just like that. And I'm also a little tube to put in to the cells here, into the the end of the frame, so the honey can come right out and into the jar. Okay, so we're seeing a bunch of questions coming in. Keep them coming. We're going to answer a few of those as we get started harvesting some honey. Now all I'm going to do to harvest the honey is put the key in. If I wanted to put it in a little way, I could just harvest a small amount of honey like this. If I wanted to harvest more honey, I could put it in all the way like this and give it a turn, and then we'll be harvesting more honey into the jars here. Look at that, it's a beautiful light coloured honey today, which will be full of those floral bursts. Usually the lighter ones have the floral notes of the flowers in them, which is a special thing to have all the different varieties. You can see the different colours, and the different colours are often corresponding to different flavours, and there's as many different flavours as there are flowers producing nectar in the world. Okay, we've got some questions.
Great, Cedar, and welcome everyone back to 2021. And we've got a great question to help set off with, as we've got very high humidity here today. And Kristen is asking, how do the fly hives cope with the high humidity?
Well, one thing when there's high temperature for sure is the honey flows really fast. So it's pretty warm here today. I'm sweating, and look at that, we've already got a full jar of honey. Now sometimes you can get bees that get a little bit lazy in the high humidity, and they'll actually not reduce the water content enough. So you can keep an eye on that. If the water content's not low enough and the honey's still runny once it's cooled down, it just means you'll need to consume it before it ferments. So that's one issue with high humidity. Otherwise, bees are so resourceful. They will go and collect water and they'll cool the hive. They've got amazing air conditioning skills. Look at that, another jar already.
Wow.
It is pouring out. This is incredible. So look at that. It's a beautiful thing to just watch these jars fill up. The honey's perfectly ready for the table. And this is just one of there's actually 12 frames in this hive. We've gone and put a second box on top here, which they haven't filled yet, but they're just getting started on it. Keep the questions coming.
Great, Cedar. Asking also, Karen's asking, what size property do you need to be able to keep a beehive?
That's the wonderful thing about beekeeping, is it's a very small footprint. This is the area a beehive takes up. So people will even keep them on city rooftops, on balconies in Berlin, in all sorts of places where the bees, although another jar already. And so yeah, it takes up a very small amount, and while while the bees are just here, they're spreading out over perhaps a 10-kilometre radius. If they're hungry, they'll forage that far to collect that nectar and bring it all back into your hive. So this honey here is the flavour of your surrounding area, and depending on what is flowering will depend on the colour and flavour of your honey, and sometimes it has medicinal properties as well, depending on what they've foraged on.
Oh, look at that golden colour. This sort of feeds on for that question, Cedar. We've got Bonnie asking, how realistic is it to actually have a hive like in there, in her veggie garden where she's working in it daily?
So it's I certainly keep hives in my vegetable garden, and so do a lot of people. Of course, it's up to you in terms of if keeping a beehive does increase the risk of stings. Of course, you can get stings just walking in your backyard if you step on the clover or something like that. But having bees around, depending on the nature of your hive, will increase the stings. Sometimes you can get a hive that's a bit more aggressive, and if you find a hive like that, then it can be a good idea to replace the queen and get back to those gentle genetics. In the end, if you have those gentle genetics, then you can be around the hive and they won't be trying to sting you. So, but having said that, it's always a good idea to look up first aid. We've got links on our website on most pages to look up first aid about bee stings and beekeepers, just so you're well educated. Okay.
Great. Jenny from Texas, this is just a customer support question. Jenny, you're saying you've got a piece that's arrived a bit damaged. Just please contact our customer support team and they'll happily help you. Katie's asking, is replacing your queen each year enough to prevent swarming? It's their first year in beekeeping.
Okay, it's not always, but the queen, if you're buying a queen off a queen breeder, then you can ask for genetics that are less swarmy, and you might be able to go for years without them swarming like that. Having said that, it's a good idea to do your what's called spring management, and that's the best way to prevent swarming. And that's simply by making sure the bees have enough room in their hive for the queen to lay eggs. And to do that, you get into the bottom box here, you're in your bee suit with your smoker, and you can either take out some honey frames from the edge to make some space and insert some new frames towards the centre. So that's what people often do in the springtime, just to make sure there's fresh cells for the queen to lay in, because that's the major trigger for swarming. Another one is that if it's full of honey and there's no more work to be done, so if you can harvest the honey, free up some space, then the bees will actually have more room, and that's another trigger for swarming. The other one, of course, is adding more boxes. So to get back to your question, you can introduce a new queen. If you've got particularly swarmy genetics and you want to change that to less swarmy, then you can introduce a new queen. Personally, I wouldn't do it every year. When you're onto a good queen, you're onto a good thing, just stay with her.
Cedar, this is a question actually that came in yesterday. Some beekeepers say that you should requeen your hive maybe every once or second year. Do you need to do that?
The answer is no. That's largely coming from commercial beekeeping, where after that extra 10%, 20% of production, if you're keeping bees at home and you're just keeping 1 to 10 hives, then you're probably not after that extra bit of production. If you were, you'd be bundling up your hives and taking them to where the flowers are, like the commercial beekeepers tend to. So having said that, if you've got a healthy hive and the queen's going good and the numbers are good and you're happy with the temperament, then I would just leave the queen be. That wasn't supposed to be a pun. The hive right outside my door at home, I've taken that queen, that hive, onto the TEDx stage about 3 years ago now, and it's still the same queen and she's still going strong, and I certainly don't want to lose her. So I'll be hanging on to that queen. She's very productive, very gentle natured, and I will just stay with that queen until one day she might sadly go.
Great. Anita's in southwest Victoria, Portland. What's the latest time you would put the super on down their way?
Okay, that is a good question. So we're still in our summer here, so you can certainly still be adding your supers now if the nectar flow is continuing. Ideally, in those colder regions, you want a good box of honey before winter, and if you don't have a box full of honey for them to survive on, then you might need to feed the bees to build up some stores, just to increase the chances of them surviving a long cold winter. So good idea to add them now. As to what the latest would be, the question you should ask your local beekeepers who'll know what's flowering in the area. Sometimes you can get autumn flows that are really quite good, and it's worth capturing those. So ask around, ask some beekeepers, and in the end, once you've got a few opinions, make up your mind and give it a go, and that's the way we learn.
Great, don't know if you can hear that dog, but it's actually my dog barking in the office up there.
Oh, Trace!
Dogs and bees. Dan's asking, can you have a beehive in suburbia?
Certainly can. So there are some places which have restrictions on it, but really mostly not. And you can have beehives in your backyard. You can then harvest the honey, and ironically, often bees do better in suburbia than they do in the forested regions. The reason why that is people plant all sorts of flowers, and that gives them a really long foraging season compared to out in the natural wilderness. You'll often get a lot of things happening in spring and summer, and then not so much the rest of the season, depending on where you are in the world, of course. So suburbia is a fantastic place to keep bees. My sister was keeping them in Suffolk Park, which is a local suburban place here, and she was far out doing me and honey, and I'm in the rural area in the forest over there. So it just would keep coming in all winter, all summer, because you've got not only some forest around, but also the things that people plant in their yards.
Great. Cedar, Chris is asking, do they need to wait for all the 6 frames are capped before they harvest? It seems to be taking a long time, and maybe some of the frames are already capped. Can you just harvest those ones? Or?
You certainly can. If you're looking in the windows and you're seeing that there's a lot of capped cells, I would go ahead and harvest. So you see here, you're seeing a lot of honey in the cells, and even the wax capping that they're putting over the top. If you look carefully, you can see the bees are walking on their wax capping, and that means they've decided the honey has a low enough moisture content to keep, and they've put the wax capping on top, so it's ready to also keep in your jar on the shelf. So you can go ahead and harvest them when they're full. It's quite a nice way to do it, is to checkerboard it, where some frames are ready, you harvest them, any remaining honey in that frame, they'll move to the next frame along, and so on. So it really is quite a good way to go about harvesting, is just as they're full, fill up your jars.
Great. Jenny's asking, do you need to treat the wood of the flow hives, and if so, what would you recommend, and are different timbers treated differently?
They are. So this is the Western red cedar. It's very popular in North America, and it's arguably the best beehive wood because it resists mildew and it resists rot, yet it's also very light and nice to work with. So that's a very, very popular wood type, and being resistant to mildew means you can also experiment with using timber oils. Now, the oils that are going to last the longest to give you this beautiful look of oiled wood are going to be your decking products. They're made for oiling timber and keeping them outdoors. So if you use a decking product, that'll give you the longest lasting. However, they often come tinted, so be mindful of that. This isn't a decking product. This is a linseed oil, and it tends to soak in. It's actually one with a solvent in it, and it actually needs another coat. So if you're wanting to keep your hive looking beautiful, natural wood like this, then you will need to give it some TLC from time to time, every 6 to 12 months, a little rub back, a little more oil. This is overdue, this hive. As you can see, it's drying out a bit, and that'll keep it looking good for longer. The other wood types, our Araucaria and our Paulownia, should be painted. If you have a look up here, you can have some great fun with your family painting your hives. There's don't know if you can see it in the distance, a hive there with mountains on it and things. That's been painted for years now and it's still looking good. So the other types will, if you oil them, they will show some mildew in the first 6 months or so. If you don't want to have that look, it doesn't actually bother the hive, it just doesn't look very good, right? So you're better off with the other wood types using some house paint, and you can have fun with that too, but with getting artistic. So some good outdoor house paint. Here's another example down here where this wood has been painted, and there's some beautiful artwork on here by Sarah with her bee art. It looks incredible.
Great, Cedar. We often get this question because people love our windows on our super and just wondering, will we ever put windows on our brood boxes?
It is a popular request, so we'll get that one going.
Fantastic. In terms of paint, Cedar, does it matter? People sort of notice we have blue roofs, all different colours. Are there colours you should stay away from, or doesn't it matter?
I probably wouldn't go black just from the sheer heat absorption, but if you're in a colder climate then you could go black as well, I guess, if you're going for the black look. But generally paint them any colour, the bees don't really care. So you go ahead and have fun. You can paint it rainbows, you can paint it blue or white or black. Conventionally bee boxes out in the paddock in Australia are white, and that's just a heat reflectivity. So that's another factor to think about as well. We've got a gabled roof on top of an inner cover, so we've got a lot more insulation than a conventional white box hive out in the sun.
Great, Cedar. I'm going to ask you a question, then I'm just going to grab my dog. But the question is that one of our Flow customers, the frames looked 100% capped, they were all looking good, but when they took them out there was quite a bit of moisture or water in the honey. Any tips on that?
Okay, look, that can happen sometimes, and you can get a situation where the frames are filling up nicely and you're seeing a beautiful field pattern here, and the bees have gotten hungry and they've started to eat a section just above the brood nest. Sometimes they'll eat a bit of an arc out because they're using that honey to feed to the babies, and it does take a frame of honey and a frame of pollen to raise a frame of brood. So if there's no nectar coming in, they might get hungry and eat some out. Then what could happen is the bees then start filling those cells with nectar again. So you could get a mixture of ripe honey and nectar coming out occasionally. If you see that, not the end of the world. It'll still be beautiful in flavour, and you should consume that before it ferments. Or you could take the opportunity to make some honey mead, or you could keep it in the fridge, which will make it last longer even if the moisture content is high. Alternatively, if you want to be really, really sure, then you can get in there and pull out the frames first and have a look. Personally, I don't do that. I just really start learning and looking, and after a while you can get a good idea of how ready the honey's going to be by watching the window. So I can already tell here in this hive that they're not completely full. You can see by this pattern that they're not. And although they've got some nice frames, we can be pretty sure that they're not full just by the way there's a whole lot of missing honey here, this one as well, and it's a bit checkerboardy, and you even get cells that have been eaten out that were full before. So once you get your eye in, you'll get to understand without having to take the hive apart by using this window and the side window with what that means on the inside of the hive, and then you'll rarely have the issue of honey being too high moisture content in your jar.
Great. Cedar, Nellie and Jack are asking, I think they're on the Central Coast. There's been a lot of rain down there, as we've had lots here in Australia. I'm just wondering, the super's not filling as quick as they would have hoped. Do you think the rain has a lot to do with it?
So certainly that if there's a long period of rain, that'll really limit the bees foraging, but it'll also set off flowers for the next round. So the flowers will certainly come and go, and it's exciting when they're there and you see a whole lot of honey coming in, and it's very patience testing when it's not. And some seasons you don't get any honey at all, and that's, I guess, the life of beekeeping, and also many types of farming where there just isn't the seasonality to line up to give you the crop. And it's a bit like that, although I do imagine it's better to keep multiple hives, because sometimes it's also your hive that actually isn't doing a wonderful job of foraging. And if you have multiple hives, then that will give you your answer of really how the season is going. And one hive to the next can be starkly different as to how quick they pull in the honey. So yeah, a little bit of patience there. Hopefully you'll get a nice autumn flow there when the rain stops and the flowers bloom.
Great. Marcello is in Melbourne and waiting. He's got a new hive, and the bees killed the previous queen. There's at least 3 queen cells in the hive that they're about to put the new hive into, but he's also ended up purchasing a queen from a breeder. What should they do with those queen cells?
Okay, well, if you want to introduce that new queen, then you'll need to destroy the queen cells. Otherwise, what may happen is there'll be a fight, and you'll likely lose your new queen you're trying to introduce. And if you've purchased a queen with specific genetics, then you might want to hang on to them. So you can either destroy those queen cells, or depending on what stage they're in, if they're capped with a queen in it, you can actually cut that out and use it to take a split or transfer it to another hive that needs one. So beekeepers will often do that. They'll take a couple of frames out, and they'll take a split using those queen cells. They could take the frames with the queen cells on it, or you can cut the queen cell out and put it onto another frame in another hive, all sorts of things. But for you, to answer your question, if you want that queen to survive that you're introducing, then tear down the queen cells in the hive just by knocking them off with your hive tool.
And Cedar, how do you spot the queen cells? Why are they different to the other cells?
So they are really quite different. They look like a peanut shell hanging down off the frame. So if you imagine that the comb surface is all hexagons, and then all of a sudden there's this protruding peanut shell hanging out and down. And that's simply to get a long enough bee in those cells. So the queen is a lot longer than the other bees, so she needs a longer cell and a larger cell. So I'm just getting buzzed by a bee here, so I'm going to put on my bee veil, and we'll just wander away. Is a good idea if you get the bee buzzing. You can just wander
veil. Or maybe
away from the hive.
You're right, Seeds.
Yeah, all good. So there's a bee buzzing me, and it's coming from the yellow hive in the corner. I was mucking around with it earlier. We were perhaps going to harvest from that one, but that hive actually is showing a bit more aggressive traits, and that's the second time it's done that. So we might be looking to introduce a queen into that hive also.
Great. Stone, while you're zooming in there, Stone's our awesome photography person. A couple of people saying, could you zoom in on the frame that's being harvested so they can see what the bees are doing?
So on the side here, let's have a look. Yeah, I think they want to have a look on the side. So you can see the bees are busy already tearing down those cells. So they're tearing away the capping, and they're starting the whole process again. Now here you can actually see the bees already starting to do their work in the end frame view. And if I turn the key a bit now, which I can turn it back to the cell formed position just by inserting the key in the top. Have a look at this. So the key's inserted all the way, turning it, and that's putting all the cell parts back into their position. And what we'll watch now, if you have a look, I'll just move the key out of the way so you can see all of those bees are starting to poke their heads down the cells and work on those cells and start the process of joining the parts together, waxing them all up, putting the nectar in, and away they go again. So I hope that answers your question there. But basically, it's amazing how quickly a busy hive will tear down the cappings and reform those cells. But another hive might actually leave them capped for some time and get back to it when they're ready. So that depends on the nectar flow and also the number of bees in the hive. But a really busy hive, and if there's a nectar flow on, they'll get in there and they'll tear off those cappings and get into it straight away. It was a real win inventing the Flow Hive. We didn't really know what was going to happen, and I had all sorts of contraptions inside the hive prior to this model where the capping section would actually get pulled off inside the hive. It was quite technical, and I'm glad we didn't have to do that. It's a real win to have the bees. They notice underneath their feet that the honey's gone, and they set about rectifying the situation by chewing away the capping, repairing the cell and filling it with honey again.
Cedar, obviously it's very hot here today where we are, and Bill's asking, do they work in cold climates?
Absolutely. So there's a bit of a myth that's been propagated through the internet about flow hives not working in cold climates, but we've got plenty of videos, plenty of people, even as far as Norway, keeping flow hives. So a lot in North America, a lot in Canada and in Europe as well. So thousands and thousands of flow hives in cold climates. Your harvesting season is when it's warmer anyway, so the honey still flows out, and it's just getting your bees through the winter, just like any other conventional beehive. You need to make sure they have enough stores to get them through the winter, and then the hive next spring.
Great, thanks. Melinda from Melbourne's asking, recently added her super to the hive. Just noticed there's a bit of condensation on the side windows. Do they need to do anything about that?
Generally not, although if you want to, you can pull out the tray down the bottom. Just make sure a whole lot of water hasn't filled your tray, and you could leave the tray out altogether if you like, to give a lot of ventilation, and that condensation could clear up.
Fantastic. People noticing the different colours of honey, Cedar, coming out of the frame. Is it just the light, or would all of these honeys taste the same depending on, like, from the same plants?
So it is just the light. If I line them up here on the roof, you'll see that that the honey in that frame is pretty monofloral, meaning it's all from a similar source. Sometimes you can get the situation where you've got a dark honey and a light honey in the same frame, and you get two-tone honey jars, but generally not. But if we go and harvest a different frame, it'll have a different colour and different flavour from the same hive. So you could expect at least 6 different flavours from this hive, from these frames here. Not always. Sometimes you've got a massive flowering of one thing and they'll fill the whole box with that. But in this area, it's generally bits and pieces of honey flows. The ironbarks will go, the melaleuca will go, and then you'll get the macadamia flowers down here in the valley will start flowering, and so on. So you just get them filling as they go, different colours and flavours, and it's such a wonderful thing to be able to share those with your friends and family. Put a comment below if you gave some honey away during this Christmas season. So a lot of people enjoy honey as a Christmas present. In fact, it's very rare to find somebody who doesn't enjoy honey, and especially when it's yours from your local area.
Fantastic. Cedar, on average, how long does a queen bee live for?
So a queen bee can live for up to 6 years, which is really different from the other bees in the hive. So the majority of the bees in the hive are the worker bees, which are all female, and in foraging season they might only live weeks. So that's very different to up to 6 years for a queen. The drones, on the other hand, the males, they will live for about 6 months. So there's a bit of an indication of the different lifespans of the bees. And the queen actually started off just the same as all the worker bees. It's only that she was continued to be fed royal jelly. And through epigenetics, she changes into a queen. So it just goes to show what you eat can really change how long you live.
Sort of like us, isn't it? Cedar, how far away can you keep a hive from your house?
So we're very close to the house here with a lot of hives. If you swing the camera around a little bit, you can see we're quite close here. However, it's up to you. It's up to you and how comfortable you are. You might like to keep them further away to begin with, get used to the idea of beekeeping, and then contemplate the idea of bringing them onto your veranda or into your bedroom with the pipe going out the window. That's sort of the extremes. But it really depends. Like, you can get a cranky hive that you don't really want by your doorstep, and you can get a really gentle hive that is nice to have by your garden. And so as you get used to beekeeping and learning about that, you can then experiment with shifting them closer.
Great. Marilyn's in Bendigo and was wanting to check their bees today, but it's a bit windy. Just wondering, is it okay to do it on a windy day, or should they wait for it to sort of calm down a bit?
So the best time for pulling apart hives and doing your brood inspections is mid-morning to mid-afternoon on a not too windy, sunny day, and that's when your bees will be the calmest. However, it's not always possible to sync up with your schedule, and we do often do beekeeping when it's windy, when it's cloudy and grey. Your bees will just be a little bit more grumpy about it. So the other thing is the temperature. If you're pulling frames out of the hive and it is cold and windy, don't leave them out too long, because the young larvae can get chill and die. So here we don't really have that trouble. We're in a subtropical region. We can beekeep all year round and it's always warm enough. But in those colder areas, that's something to be mindful of.
Great. Cedar, Michael's asking, any natural organic tips to cut down on beetle, mites and pests?
Okay, yes, so let's see if we can see this. We might actually shut off this harvesting. We'll let it go a bit longer. We'll have a look on another hive. But basically, there's a tray underneath. So let's see what's going on in this hive here. Haven't opened it for a little while. And you've got a pest management tray down the bottom. Okay, somebody's cleaned it out recently. And we're actually experimenting with detergent now. This hive has a total of 0 beetles in it. I have been finding the detergent water's been working quite well as a natural pest management solution there, without having to put insecticides in your hive. But oil is the typical one that people have been using. So you can just put some cooking oil in that tray, and the beetles can go down through the screen bottom board, but the bees can't. So you can catch a whole lot of beetles using cooking oil, or you can experiment with water and a little bit of detergent will also kill beetles. I wouldn't do that in the colder areas. You don't want to have a whole lot of extra humidity fogging up the inside of your hive. As far as counting mites go, I'm no expert. Perhaps somebody who's experienced with that we're probably one of the only continents without the varroa mite. But basically, you can use the tray as a mite counting board to keep an eye on the level of mites in your hive. You could turn it over and use the bottom if it's nice and clean, and count how many mites drop through onto that tray surface. But if anyone's got some good ideas on mite control, put it in the comments below, and hopefully we as beekeepers will get better and better at managing any problems that come the honeybees' way.
Great tip, thanks Cedar.
We've got time for a couple more questions.
Oh, okay, look, this is a real local one. This is Karen from Ballina, who's literally down the coast. We can probably almost see your house, Karen.
You can probably wave. Hi.
Karen's just, she's ready, the hives are ready, it's all capped, ready to harvest. She seems to be having a problem turning her key,
Okay.
and she's wondering, would the wax be clogging it? And any tips for her to try and open up her flow frames?
Yes, yes. So sometimes the bees will stick them together really well. Sometimes they'll use propolis. Sometimes they'll really gum the parts together, especially those parts that are moving like this on the inside of your flow frame. So the secret is you've got your key, and you can just harvest it in segments, and that'll make it a lot easier. So to do that, you'll be inserting the key in the bottom. I don't want to open this one again, so I'll just insert it in the top for the purposes of the demo. But you'd insert that in the bottom slot, and you can go one cell at a time if you want to, but just put it in a little way and turn it back to a 90 and turn it again, and that'll make it a lot easier, and you can just harvest the frame like that.
Fantastic. Karen, hopefully that, Eleanor?
Let us know how you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Judge Eat's asking, this is a pretty common question we get actually, asking, is it better to have, they live in Melbourne in the southeast suburbs, is it better to have a double brood box or a double super?
Okay, it's really up to you. I find if you count the cells in a brood box, there is enough to sustain a few thousand eggs a day being laid if the queen is in peak production. However, some beekeepers like to keep a double brood, and what usually happens is they span the brood nest out over 2 boxes with honey on the edges. Alternatively, you can just keep the one brood box, and if you're wanting to add multiple boxes for more space in your hive, you could add another super. So the answer is you could go either way is fine.
Great. Cedar, just wondering, do we ship these hives all around the world?
We do. We have warehouses in key locations around the world, so there'll be one near you, and it's quite quick usually. Sometimes COVID related delays are there, but mostly it's still working quite well, and we can get hives to you very quickly.
Great. A couple of people now want us to put a drone over our apiary so they can really see the whole of the Flow Hive apiary from above. Cedar, you might have to fly over with your camera or something.
Or maybe we'll connect a bunch of helium balloons to the back of Stone and he can just float up. Yeah, like a Danny deck chair.
Cedar, what do you think about someone's bought a cedar hive and they've been told to hot wax it.
Yep.
What do you think about that?
So hot wax dipping, I have tried, and it didn't work out very well for me. I think the wax was a little bit dirty and the finish just wasn't that great. The other thing that happened on some of the panels is they changed size a little bit, and that just created some issues with the fitment. So for that, I recommend the hot wax dipping. Cedar itself will last a very long time, and just using some decking oils on the outside will keep it lasting. However, if you've had success with the hot wax dipping, do let us know. Maybe there's some tips and tricks that we don't know about.
Great. Cedar, this one we get asked as well a bit about the ants. Is there getting a few ants in the super honey frames? Any tips on how to deal with this, and is it a problem?
Yes, okay. Ants are just a cosmetic issue, really. The bees will keep the inside where they're working ant-free. They're very good at that. But they will get behind the covers and be a bit of a nuisance. In fact, early this morning I noticed that one of these had been left off and the ants are making a home inside there, so that's not so good. To get them out, you can take that cover off again, throw a little bit of cinnamon powder in there, and that will annoy them enough to drive them out. You can put your cap back on, and the same thing goes for behind the covers. You can use a bit of cinnamon powder to deter them. Some people create an ant barrier, and you can do that with the Flow Hive 2 legs just by greasing the leg bolt here with some Vaseline, and that'll create a bit of an ant barrier as they try and crawl up that leg. Of course, it only works if you've removed the foliage from touching the hive. If you've got foliage like we have around here that is touching the hive, then the ants will go along that. So if you're using an ant barrier, some people use little tubs of water that the feed are in. Others use the grease on the bolts. Then you'll need to chop away all the foliage. And usually I find, even if you do nothing but brush all the ants away a few times, the ants will go away. But if they're persistent, then there's a few tips and tricks to do something about it. Thank you very much for all your questions. It's very hot here, I'm dripping with sweat. So we're going to wrap this one up, but if you've got more questions, put them in the comments below. Also let us know what you'd like us to cover next week, and we'll be back same time with some more interesting information.